Hey, my name is Sam. I'm 33 years old, and I run a small appliance repair shop called Callaway Fix-It out of a converted garage on the main street of Dunbar, West Virginia, a town of about 9,000 people in the Kanawha Valley, where the river bends twice before it reaches Charleston and the hills crowd up on both sides like they're listening to a conversation they weren't invited to. I repair things people have given up on: toasters, stand mixers, vacuum cleaners, box fans, sewing machines, radios older than I am. People bring me things their grandmothers used, things they bought before they had money to buy better, things they can't replace, because the replacement wouldn't be the same thing. They apologize when they come through the door, mostly. They say they know it's probably not worth fixing. They say they're not sure why they brought it. They say, "Go ahead and tell me if it's hopeless." I tell them the same thing every time: let me look at it first. 9 times out of 10, there's a fix. The 10th time, I tell them honestly. And I don't charge them anything for looking. My father ran the shop before me. His father ran something like it before that, though in those days it was radios and irons and the occasional washing machine motor. I grew up in the back room doing homework on a workbench while my father repaired things. And I learned the work the same way I learned language, by being around it so long it became the way I understood everything else. A system that isn't working has a reason. The reason can be found. Once you find it, you fix it, and then you make sure you understand why it failed, so you can recognize the pattern next time. That's all repair is: finding the reason and being honest about what you find. I open the shop at 8 and close at 5 most days, later on Thursdays when people get paid and remember the things they've been meaning to bring in. I eat lunch from a diner called Patsy's 2 doors down, where the owner, a woman named Vera, who is 71 and has the handshake of someone who has been making pie crust for 50 years, makes me a plate of whatever she made for lunch without my having to order. She has been doing this for so long that I can't remember the last time I chose what I ate at noon, which is a form of comfort I would not have predicted wanting, and which I have come to depend on more than I admit. My house is 3 blocks from the shop, a 2-bedroom that belonged to my father, that I bought from my mother when she moved to be near my sister in Morgantown 8 years ago. It has a porch with 2 wooden chairs that need refinishing, and a yard that stays manageable, because I mow it every 2 weeks whether it needs it or not. The kitchen is larger than I need, and the living room is smaller, which was the reverse of what my father always said a house should be. But I've never changed it. I've been alone for a while. There was a woman named Rosalind, who I was with for nearly 3 years, who was warm and good, and who eventually said, kindly, truthfully, that she felt like she was always on the outside of something I was keeping to myself. She wasn't wrong. I am a man who is better at demonstrating care than at letting it show on the surface, and that cost me something I still think about when the house is quiet. After Rosalind, I told myself I was fine with the shape of things, and mostly that was true, and in the ways it wasn't true I didn't examine too closely. I want to tell you that honestly before I tell you the rest, because the rest doesn't make sense unless you know the kind of man I was walking into this. Addie moved into the apartment above the hardware store across the street in the first week of October. I didn't know her name yet. I knew she had a lot of boxes, and she carried them herself, 2 trips for every box, no help, which told me something about her. I knew she had a lamp that she set in the window the first evening and turned on before anything else was set up, which told me something else. I knew she had a cat that sat in the open window of the moving van for most of the afternoon with the patient, evaluating expression that cats bring to any situation that is technically beneath their dignity. The second day, she came into the shop. She stood in the doorway with a box fan under one arm. and looked around with the expression of someone who is not sure they've come to the right place and isn't going to ask yet. "I'll look at it," I said, without her saying anything. She set the fan on the counter. It was a Lasko, maybe 15 years old, one of the window mount models. It ran but made a sound it shouldn't have. I could tell that before I even touched it. "It rattles," she said. "The blade housing," I said. "Probably a loose retaining clip." 5 minutes. She looked at me. "You can tell that without opening it?" "I can usually hear what's wrong before I see it," I said. She watched me work. Not hovering, standing back against the wall with her arms crossed. Watching the way a person watches when they're actually curious, rather than just waiting. The fan was exactly what I'd thought. The retaining clip had worked loose. The blade was catching on every rotation. I reseated it, tested it, handed it back. She turned it on. No rattle. She looked at the fan and then at me. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing, that's a 2-minute job." She looked like she wanted to argue about it. "Come back when something actually needs fixing," I said. "That's how it works." She looked at the fan for a moment. Then she looked up. "I'm Addie," she said. "Addie Marsh. I just moved in across the street." "I know," I said. "Sam Calloway. This is my shop." "I know," she said. She left with the fan. I watched her cross the street and go up the stairs to the apartment above the hardware store, carrying the fan in one hand and her keys in the other, and I went back to the voltage regulator I'd been working on and didn't think about it, or not more than a few times. She came back the following Thursday with a stand mixer. The mixer was a KitchenAid, pale yellow, probably from the 1970s based on the design, one of the originals. It ran at full speed and wouldn't shift to anything lower, which is a symptom I know well. The speed control board. Usually, parts for that model are still findable if you know where to look. And I know where to look. She watched me open it with the same focused attention as before. "Where did you get it?" I asked, because that model didn't show up in Dunbar by accident. "It was my grandmother's," she said. "She gave it to me when I moved. She said to get it fixed." "She knows what she's talking about," I said. Something in her face that was quiet and fond. She usually does. We talked while I worked. She'd moved to Dunbar to take a position at the county library. She was a children's librarian, specifically the kind who did programming, story times, reading groups, the summer reading challenge. She'd been in Clarksburg before this. Before that, in a small town in Virginia. Before that, a long stretch in Ohio, where she'd gone to library school and then stayed for a few years. She moved, she said, when she felt she'd done what she came to do. I asked how she knew when that was. She said, "The kids stop surprising me. When I can predict what they'll say before they say it, I know it's time." "Don't you want roots somewhere?" I said. She looked at the mixer. "I want to be useful somewhere," she said. "Roots come from being in the same place for a long time. Usefulness comes from knowing when to be where you're needed." She paused. "I think I've been confusing them." I looked at the mixer and thought about that for a while. The part she needed was a special order. I told her 2 weeks, maybe less. She nodded. She said she'd come back. Before she left, she looked around the shop properly for the first time, taking in the shelves of waiting repairs, the wall of parts drawers, the framed photograph of my father at the original workbench. "Is that your father?" she said. "Yes, he looks like someone who fixed things," she said. "He was," I said. She looked at the photograph for a moment longer. Then she went out, and the bell above the door sounded, and I sat for a while before going back to work. The part came in 11 days. I called her. She came that afternoon. I installed the board while she watched, then ran the mixer through all its speeds. It worked the way a thing works when it was built right and is now right again, smooth and certain, with the particular quiet confidence of a machine that knows what it's for. She put her hand on it when I set it on the counter, like she was verifying it. "My grandmother is going to be very pleased," she said. "Tell her the machine is in good shape," I said. "These old motors are better than anything made now. She should keep using it." Addie looked at me. "Is that your standard line? Telling people to keep using old things?" "It's my honest opinion," I said. "People throw things away too fast. Most of what comes through that door just needs someone to pay attention to it." She was quiet for a moment. "I believe that," she said. "About most things." She paid for the part it cost, which was all I'd let her pay, and I walked her to the door in the way I walk customers to the door when the conversation has been good, not rushing them out, just accompanying. She stood on the step with the mixer under her arm and the October street behind her, leaves coming off the maple at the corner. "Thank you, Sam," she said. "Come back when something else needs fixing," I said. She smiled, small and specific. "I think I will," she said. The walking started without being decided. Patsy's Diner is open on Friday evenings, later than usual, and Addie started coming in on Fridays. I noticed her the second Friday, sitting alone at the window table with a book and a bowl of soup. I was finishing up at the shop and went in for coffee, and she looked up when I came through the door. And Vera looked between us with the expression of someone adding a column of numbers in her head and arriving at the answer she expected. I sat across from Addie. We talked through 2 cups of coffee and her bowl of soup, and a piece of pie that Vera brought without being asked, which Vera also did not bring to everyone, and which was its own form of commentary. When Addie stood to leave, I stood too. It was 8:30, dark October. The hardware store was 2 blocks. "I'll walk you," I said. She looked at me. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," I said. We walked. She told me about the library's new Storytime theme. She was building a whole month around books set in different seasons, teaching kids that stories happen all year, not just at Christmas. She said the children's section smelled like old paper and rubber cement, and she found it the most comforting smell she knew. I said I understood. The shop smelled like solder flux and motor oil, and I couldn't imagine smelling anything better at 8 in the morning. We reached the door to her apartment, a separate entrance from the hardware store, a blue-painted door beside the shop window. She stopped. I stopped. "Good night, Sam," she said. "Good night," I said. I walked home. The 3 blocks felt like the right length. I didn't examine why. It happened the next Friday the same way: dinner at Patsy's, the walk, the blue door, good night, and the Friday after that. By the 4th Friday, it was simply what happened on Friday evenings, and neither of us said anything about it. And I understood that not saying anything about it was itself a kind of agreement. She brought me a book the 3rd Friday, left it on the shop counter when she came to tell me her neighbor's vacuum cleaner had a burning smell she thought I should look at, which I did. Free belt replacement, 15 minutes. The book was a collection of short stories, authors I hadn't heard of, with a sticky note on the inside cover that said, "Story on page 47. The story on page 47 was about a man who repaired clocks in a town where no one agreed on what time it was. I read it twice and thought about it for most of a week. When I handed it back the following Friday, I said, "The ending." She said, "I know." That was the whole conversation. It was enough. There were nights the walk took longer than 2 blocks had any right to take. We went the long way once, along the river end of Oak Street, past the courthouse with its one working lamp and the bakery exhaust that smells like bread even at 9 o'clock at night. We stopped once at the corner of 4th and Mill because she spotted a great horned owl in the pin oak above the hardware store and we both stood looking up at it until it tired of us and moved on. Those extra minutes were not accidental, and we both knew it, and neither of us said so, which was a conversation conducted entirely in the absence of words. In November, she asked if I wanted to walk on Saturdays too. She'd taken to walking the river path on Saturday mornings, she said, and it was more interesting with company. I said yes. We walked most Saturdays through November and into December, an hour along the river, talking about everything and nothing, with the ease of two people who have gotten past the part where you're still performing and arrived at the part where you're just present. She told me about her parents, her father, a methodical man who had kept records of everything, the temperatures each morning for 30 years, the birds he saw and when, every book he'd read catalogued by month. He died 4 years ago. She spoke about him with the quiet precision of someone who has had time to understand a person properly and knows they'll never be finished. Her mother was alive and in Florida and called on Sundays and asked about grandchildren in the way that is a statement dressed as a question, which Addie described with a dry humor that was the verbal equivalent of a very slight eye roll. She told me about the moving, too, the real version of it, the one underneath the practical explanation she'd given me in the shop. She said she thought for a long time that she moved because she was needed in a new place. But somewhere in the last year she had started to wonder whether she moved because she was better at beginnings than middles, whether the leaving every time happened just before something would have asked more of her than she was sure she could give. "Is that what you think happened?" I said. "I think it's part of what happened," she said. "I think I've been honest about the part that's true without looking too hard at the part that isn't comfortable." I looked at the river. "I do that differently," I said. "I don't leave. I just keep the surface smooth. I'm good at managing the outside of something while what's actually wrong goes unfixed." She looked at me. "Is something wrong?" she said. "Right now?" "No," I said. "I mean in general. The thing Rosalind said, the outside of something I was keeping to myself, that's a real description of a real pattern." Addie was quiet for a moment. "Have you fixed it?" she said. "I'm working on it," I said. Slowly, she looked at the river again. "My father kept all his records in notebooks," she said. "When he died, we found 30 years of them. Every temperature, every bird, every book." She paused. "He never wrote anything about how he felt. The notebooks are a precise record of what he observed and nothing about what it meant to him." She looked at her hands. "I loved him, and I think he loved us, and I would give a great deal to know what he made of any of it." I thought about that for a long time. "I'm going to say what things mean to me," I said. "I'm working on that too." She turned her head and looked at me directly. "To me?" she said. "Quiet, specific, to you," I said, "among other things." She held that for a moment. Then she looked back at the river, and after a second she leaned her shoulders slightly into mine, just barely, and I stood still and let it mean what it meant. We walked back without saying much. The cold came off the water. The path curved back toward town and we followed it. And when we reached the corner of Oak Street, she turned toward her door, and I turned toward mine, and she said goodnight without looking back, which I was beginning to understand meant she was thinking about something she wasn't ready to say yet. I walked home and stood in my kitchen for a while without turning on the light. Vera said something to me in December. It was a Tuesday, not a Friday, and I was in for lunch and eating at the counter while she refilled coffee. She set the pot down and looked at me with the specific expression she uses when she's decided to say a thing she's been holding for a while. "That library woman," she said. "Addie," I said. She came in for coffee on Monday morning, sat at the window table. Vera looked at her coffee pot. "She looked out at your shop for a while." I didn't say anything. She looked out the way you look when you're trying not to look like you're looking, Vera said. You know that look. Vera, I said. I'm 71 years old, Samuel. I have watched people in this diner for 40 years. She picked up the pot. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what I see. She walked back to the kitchen. She paused at the pass-through. Your father walked your mother home from the movie house every Friday night for 6 weeks before he said anything. 6 weeks. When he finally said it, she told him she'd been wondering what was taking so long. She went through to the kitchen. I sat with my coffee. I thought about Addie at the window table, looking at the shop. I thought about 6 Fridays in a row, and 6 Saturday mornings, and the particular way the walk had become something that didn't need explaining because we'd both agreed to it in the same silent moment. I thought about the blue door and the specific quality of the pause before goodnight, the way neither of us rushed it, the way we both stood there for a beat longer than the situation required. I went back to the shop and repaired a toaster and a blender and a reel-to-reel tape player that a man had driven 40 minutes to bring me. And I thought about what Vera had said the whole time without arriving anywhere useful. There is a particular kind of repair problem that I call a ghost fault, where the mechanism tests fine under normal conditions, but fails in the field, and you cannot reproduce the failure at the bench. The unit comes in, you check everything, nothing is wrong. It goes home. It fails again. Ghost faults require a different approach. You stop looking at the mechanism and start looking at the context. What is happening around the unit when it fails? What changed? What is present in the field that isn't present at the bench? I thought about that for a while. I was not approaching this like a ghost fault. I was sitting at the bench running tests that kept coming back clean when the actual information was in the field. Addie at the window table. The way she looked at the shop without looking like she was looking. 6 Fridays. The long way around Oak Street. The owl. I didn't come to any conclusion that I acted on that day. But I stopped pretending the bench was telling me everything I needed to know. The Friday before Christmas, Addie came to Patsy's with her hair down, which she usually wore up, and I noticed it, and didn't say I noticed it in the way I didn't say most things I noticed. We ate and talked, and Vera brought us each a piece of the bourbon pecan pie she only made in December and gave me a look over Addie's shoulder that was not subtle. We walked the 2 blocks in the cold. The town had its lights up. The hardware store window had a wreath. The bakery next to it had candles. The maple at the corner had white lights strung in a way that made the bare branches look like something intentional rather than something winter did to them. We reached the blue door. Addie stopped. I stopped. It was the 6th Friday. The pause before goodnight. But this time she didn't say goodnight. She turned to look at me in the way she had, direct, specific, not performing anything, and she said, "Sam." "Yeah, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why do you walk me home?" I looked at her. The cold was real, and the lights in the maple were white behind her, and her breath was in the air between us. "Because I want to," I said. "You do it every Friday," she said. "I know. You never said anything," she said. "Not as a complaint, as an observation, a specific, precise one." "No," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "Why not?" The question settled around us. The street was quiet. Somewhere a door closed. The lights in the maple held steady. "Because I don't want to say something before I know I mean it exactly right," I said. "I've said things before that were true but not right enough. And I didn't want to do that with this." She looked at me. "And now?" she said. I looked at her in the cold December street with the lights and the blue door and the 6 weeks of Friday nights behind us like a trail of breadcrumbs leading here. "Now I know what I mean," I said. "I walk you home because you are the best part of my Friday and my Saturday. And because when something worth seeing happens during the week, a repair that comes out exactly right, a funny thing Vera says, a bird on the shop windowsill I've never seen before, you're the first person I want to tell it to. And I think that means something I should stop being careful about saying." She held very still. "Sam," she said. "Yeah, why don't you come in?" The inside of her apartment was exactly what it should have been. Warm and slightly cluttered in the specific way of someone who has moved often and learned what actually matters. The grandmother's mixer on the kitchen counter. Books in uneven stacks because the shelves weren't enough. The lamp she'd put in the window first, casting the kind of light that makes a room feel like it chose you. The cat, whose name, I learned, was Bernard, regarded me from the back of the sofa with the professional neutrality of someone who has seen people come and go and is reserving judgment. She made tea. We sat at her kitchen table with it, the way people sit when they've finally arrived somewhere they were already going, and they know it, and they're not in any hurry now that they're here. "I looked at your shop from that window," she said, not looking at the window, "more than once." "I know," I said. She looked at me. "Vera," she said. "Vera," I said. She looked at her tea. "I was trying to figure out what you were," she said. "What kind of man fixes things and doesn't make a production of it? Who tells people to keep using old things, because most of them just need someone to pay attention?" She looked at the mixer. "My grandmother asked me about the shop when I called to tell her the mixer was fixed. She said, 'What's he like?' The man who fixed it. I said he's someone who pays attention to things." She looked back at me. She said, "Keep going back." "Smart woman," I said. "She is." A pause. "I've been moving for 10 years, she said. "When I left Ohio, I thought it was because I'd done what I came to do. The kids had stopped surprising me." She turned the teacup in her hands. "But I think part of it was that I'd gotten good at leaving before things got complicated. Before anything asked too much of me." She looked at the table. "Dunbar surprised me. The kids here surprised me. And then, you surprised me. And I've been sitting with that." "What did you do with it?" I said. "I looked out the window," she said. "And I came back to the shop, and I said yes to Friday dinners." She looked at me steadily. "I kept saying yes and waiting to see what happened." "What happened?" I said. "This," she said. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. She looked at. Bernard got up from the sofa, walked the full length of the room, and settled on the chair beside her with the decisive air of someone who has made a ruling. She looked at the cat, and then at me, and something in her face came fully into the open, the thing that had been almost there on so many Fridays, held back by the same patience that had built the path to this kitchen table. "I was beginning to wonder," she said, "if you were ever going to say it." "I was building to it," I said. 6 weeks, she said. I wanted to mean it right. She looked at me for a long moment. "You did," she said. "For the record, you meant it right." I kissed her there at the kitchen table with the lamplight and the grandmother's mixer, and Bernard watching from the adjacent chair with an expression of grudging endorsement. It was unhurried and certain, the kind of kiss that doesn't need to prove anything, because the 6 weeks before, it already did. When we broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine for a moment. "Why don't you stay?" she said. "I'll make more tea." "Yes," I said. We sat in her kitchen until past midnight, talking the way you talk when you're not watching the clock anymore. The lamp in the window threw its light out over the street below, the same lamp she'd put there first, before anything else was in its place. That was 9 months ago. The library's summer reading challenge this year was the biggest it's ever been in Dunbar. She talked the county into tripling the prize budget and ran the whole thing herself, including a finale event in the park with a local storyteller she'd driven to Morgantown to meet and convince personally, which she described as no more complicated than it sounds, and which I know from the planning conversation we had in April at my kitchen table took 3 attempts and a very specific letter. 41 kids finished the challenge. She put all their names on a banner she made herself and hung it in the children's section, where it still is. I helped her grandmother's mixer, I should say. I helped it run through the summer without a complaint. Addie uses it now on Sunday mornings. She has been learning her grandmother's biscuit recipe, which is a process that involves calling her grandmother and arguing pleasantly for 20 minutes every Sunday about whether the butter needs to be colder. I drink coffee and listen to these calls and find them among the best parts of the week. Bernard has decided I live here, which I more or less do, or close enough that the distinction has become administrative rather than actual. He sits on the arm of the sofa when I read in the evenings and maintains that he is not doing this because he likes me specifically, merely because the sofa arm is the best location in the apartment, which happens to be next to where I sit. Last week he knocked a pen off the table in what I can only describe as a deliberate editorial act, looked at it on the floor, looked at me, and walked away. Vera, when I told her this, said, "That animal has good judgment." Vera came to the library's summer finale event in the park. She sat in a folding chair in the front row and watched 41 children receive their names on the banner, and she cried, which she denied afterward, and which everyone present witnessed. She has adopted Addie in the way she adopts people she decides are worth the trouble, which means she asks pointed questions and remembers every answer and shows up at the apartment on Sunday mornings occasionally with a container of something she made too much of. Addie receives these visits with warmth and brings Vera tea and reports to me afterward that Vera told her at least 2 things about my father that I didn't know, which Addie seems to find more valuable than any other intelligence she has gathered on the subject of Sam Calloway. The porch chairs at my house are refinished now. Addie noticed they needed it in May and said so, and I finally did it. They're a dark green now, her suggestion, and they look like they were always supposed to be that color, and I just hadn't gotten there yet. We sit in them on evenings when the weather allows, her with something to read, me with coffee. Bernard sometimes on the railing watching the yard with the proprietary interest of a cat who has decided a third location is also his jurisdiction. I think about repair a lot. I always have. It's my whole life, in a professional sense. But I understand something about it now that I understood in theory before and understand in fact now, which is the difference between knowing how something works and knowing it. The thing that makes a repair worth doing is not that the mechanism was broken. Most mechanisms are fixable. What makes it worth doing is that someone paid enough attention to notice the fault, and cared enough to bring it in, and trusted that it could be made right. That's all it is. Attention and care and a willingness to trust that most things, not all things, but most things, can be made right if you're patient enough and honest enough about what you find. Addie moved into the apartment above the hardware store across the street in the first week of October. She put the lamp in the window before anything else. She carried her own boxes. I walked her home every Friday night for 6 weeks. Until she finally said, "Why don't you come in?" I went in. I haven't needed to be walked home since.